Welcome back to SideQuest, episode 28, Final Fantasy VII, episode 16, and we find ourselves on our own side quest today away from the main journey and over towards the western continent with the eastern theme, Wutai, and back with me, as usual, is my esteemed colleague, Mr. Wesley Schantz. Welcome back, Mr. Wesley Schantz.
Hey, glad to be back.
Glad to have you back. And so you were the one that first suggested this foray into Wutai. And so I guess I should ask, why'd you want to take this moment after the Temple of the Ancients to go get into Yuffie's character? B, I should thank you because I didn't have Yuffie before then, and I backtracked and got her. And it's so interesting. And backtracking to get her, I then started cleaning up my act a little more, right? I then went to get Beta from the Midgar Zolom, which I then tested myself against, and I could beat it, and it gave me some good experience. And what else did I do? I also I did, I think, one other thing that I mentioned in text, but I can't recall it. Oh, excuse me?
Getting the big guard?
I asked you about getting Aqualung and Big Guard, but I didn't yet get those. But basically, I did get Yuffie, I did get Beta, and I think I acquired some. I went to the other thing I did, which I hadn't done yet, and I'd really been accruing a bill of things I should have done that I have not done while playing through this game, probably for the last time in my life, right? Unless we teach this game many more times, in which case not, which would be excellent. But I hadn't talked to Zach's parents yet at Gongaga, where we started off this segment from. And so I got to talk to them and just see how odd it was, that exchange between them. And Tifa, do you know him? Do you know him? And she's like, no. And it's very interesting and weird. And so I feel as if I am playing the game a little more diligently now. I am now taking it more seriously. I am trying to prepare for the bosses better. I'm looking into strategy, using a small strategy guide, which I consider like using scholarship when you teach a book. And it's very helpful, and you cannot use it, but in certain parts it will save you a lot of time, which I'm very interested in by using it. And I also find myself investing in the future, right? I use double growth weapons for most of my main characters, and I try and level up the most important materia that I can as fast as possible. So an actual part of my gameplay experience is attempting to invest in the best possible things now in order to have the best possible future. And I was texting you about that before the show, wondering if that's sort of what the major appeal is of an RPG, or what the ultimate sort of gift of an RPG is, that it can help you learn to do that. But that is probably why RPGs have much less appeal and get worse sales, at least in America, than, say, sports games, particularly like football ones like Madden, right?
Yeah, I don't know much about the economic side of this as much as I would like to, and I think this is one of those topics we've thrown out there for further discussion with someone who does specialize in it, like things about the cultural differences, cultural history, and social norms surrounding these games and things like that. All of that would be really interesting to go into. I know that they do appeal to certain sorts of people everywhere. And I think you and I are both those sorts of people. Obviously, we love these games, and yet we're very different in many ways. But one thing we do have in common is that we like to read, and that's like something we get into. And so that's what this game really provides that other sorts of games don't. And that goes also to the strategy guides too, because you can look up stuff about the game, get really into the lore, and get into all of the side quests, right? These are the kinds of games that have those. Other games have other kinds of secrets and Easter eggs and things, but a proper side quest you've got to do in an RPG. And so that's why I suggested that we go to Wutai, is looking at that. I think you sent me a screenshot captured from it's jagged or jagged.com. I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but it's a good one to look at on your phone, I've found, because it displays really nicely and you can like scroll up and down pretty quickly and find things. And so they suggest, like, after Temple of the Ancients, this is a good time to go and do the Yuffie side quest in Wutai, because you've got these zero materia slot weapons now, which are like useful because you're going to have all your materia stolen. And I was like, yeah, let's go on a side quest. That sounds great. And it's kind of challenging too, because it's like the earliest you can, it's not the earliest you can do it, but it's the earliest you can reasonably accomplish it, you know, in a kind of an efficient way, I guess, like you're talking about. And so I thought we better do it sooner than later. And just to like, I think it makes a cool parallel. Maybe I brought this up last time, I don't know. Because you get Kate Sith, who leaves your party briefly, right? Not even long enough to really notice, because he gets sacrificed, chomped by the temple, and then he's back in his new avatar. And so you don't really notice that he's gone, but he is. And then right away, Eris is gone. And so now you've lost a party member. And now here, when you come to Wutai, Yuffie absents herself. She sneaks off and thieves from you. And so it's like a weird kind of parallel to that, and to the Corneo thing. You get that kind of like replayed here, the Don Corneo section from Midgar, which entailed Eris and Tifa and Cloud. And so this time it's Yuffie and one of the Turks, Elena, who are the two girls. So it's a real interesting parallel in a number of ways. I just thought we could kind of look at some of those things, along with obviously some new places to explore and new characters to meet and so on.
Yeah, I want to ask you about the theme of betrayal by party members of the party, and how that sort of is manifesting here, again, in the same way it has manifested with Kate Sith, and in the same way you might say, I guess, Cloud manifested it, which made Ares disappear at the Temple of the Ancients. But also I wanted to ask you about something you brought up last time, which is sort of the theme of the Wutai. It has this sort of Eastern theme, this sort of Chinese-esque theme, right? And they had a sort of Buddhist-esque, Taoist-esque water god, water serpent god, right? A snake god. And one of the women who is there in the city, and, you know, even the music is drum and like sort of wind instrument, sort of flute. The makeup of the houses is a traditional Chinese design. I wish I could say from which time period in particular, but it just, they look exactly like what they are. And that they've sort of lost faith in this god ever since they lost to Shinra, since they lost in the war. And they've gone from sort of being a powerful, noble, beautiful nation to now just sort of a mockery or an amusement. And what that meant, and whether you thought that had any connection to what the game makers might be saying about their own culture in the wake of World War II. I know we've brought that up before, and again, that's another thing we'd like an expert to talk to us about. But I was wondering what you were seeing there, and how that related to us not having our materia, and whether that's supposed to represent us like not having our spirit or our soul, and how Yuffie's master plan is to steal our materia in order to infuse it into her people, right, so that they can be strong again. It's like she's trying to give them heart back. And so I was very interested in that as well.
Yeah, definitely. It has a very distinct aesthetic to it. It has the pagoda and the gong and this big square that's like off in the woods, kind of past the town. And it's got the river, the water that actually like runs through the midst of the town. It's also got the huge statues up in like a little mountainous area on the other side behind the town. So there's a lot going on there. I like the idea about the materia sort of representing Yuffie's, her pride in her hometown and her home country and culture, that she's trying to steal it back, because it sounds like Shinra sort of took all of the materia that had been there. And so this is her kind of Robin Hood thief attempt to revive, and regenerate, reinvigorate her people. And that's like personified in her father, right? Because he sort of just like sleeps all the time, we're told. Ever since they lost, he's really lost his confidence. And she sort of like stirs him up there by, antagonizing him. And so there is a further side quest that goes with this, where Yuffie will fight her way up the pagoda alone. I don't think she's ready, at least in my party, yet to do that. So I'm not going to try to do that one just yet. But again, it's an option at this point. Once you do the materia stealing thing and successfully, then that opens up that further side quest for her. So it's like, it's one of the first final pieces of a character's story, because it's like in very quick succession we're getting her backstory. Like we get to her hometown and we see her backstory and the place's backstory, the way we did for each of the other characters already. And we're also given the option to find her fourth limit break right away, which is this the prize that you get for doing the pagoda. So it's like she very quickly gets really fleshed out as a character. I think that again goes to like her nature is like very impetuous, very cunning and swift, and very like playful, I guess. In some way, she again portrays that aspect of the game which is self-referential, and part of that is the cultural aspect of it, but I think part of it also is her playfulness. She's messing with the rest of the party in a kind of similar way to Kate Sith. So she makes you think of the game as a game, I suppose.
Well, even even in her betrayal of you, she's sort of childish about it. And so what she seems to represent, and she is sort of portrayed androgynously with short hair, especially in her, not her sprite, but her character profile, that with soft features like a child. She is sort of the figure of the child, or the eternal figure of hope, right? There you have Tifa and you have Ares, but they're both sort of like romantic interests-ish, or women of a certain age there. Yuffie's just like a little bit younger than they are and sort of off the radar. And so even when she betrays you, it is for this sort of like childishly hopeful reason, right? She is like a primitive form of the hero. So like the scholars say in Homer research that the figure of the trickster morphed into the figure of the hero. And so that's what the transition step between like Achilles, who's like a Heracles or strong figure, into an Odysseus, is what's happening there between those epics, is the transitioning of a leading ideal of a people from the idea of pure strength to cunning. And so what Yuffie here is an incomplete idea of the hero, one who still has the highest hopes, but doesn't yet use means appropriate to the heroic task. So what does she do? She steals something. She doesn't earn it rightfully. And so you don't hate her. I don't personally feel a lot of enmity towards her. I feel a lot of annoyance. But again, I feel like that is like, especially as a teacher, speaking to a teacher, an emotion tied to our craft, right? When a young person does something out of line, it generally doesn't cause fury in you or some deep negative emotion, but rather mostly just annoyance that they stepped out of line and didn't understand what it was they were doing. And that's sort of like what Yuffie seems to be doing with her own father here, and with your heart as the player, and with the entire group. And I think that's why the group also, and I love this parallel in the game, as she's giving her reasons for why she did this, they walk away without listening to her, just like you had to first do in order to acquire her as a player, which I actually recently did like an hour of gameplay ago.
Yes. So that can really compress her whole story, if that's the case.
Yeah, exactly.
Join the party, go to her hometown, she steals your materia. Yeah, that's awesome. That's cool.
Yeah, so even my relationship with her is sort of childish at this point. But I feel like what she represents is, even so many of these figures have such dark pasts, you know, Sid and losing potential, and Barrett and all that death, you, and God knows what's happening with you after the Temple of the Ancients, and the fact that you were in Soldier. And Vincent, like, you have some people that have some serious wear and tear on their moral fabric, right? And Yuffie, even though she is a thief and does steal from you, it is, and I don't want to be so cliche, as if she is still stealing your heart. Like, it's like she's readying your heart for some great endeavor or something like that. I don't know. Wutai is so interesting a place because she is a figure of hope, and yet it is itself, though it has a flowing river, a place that recalls to me Booth Rotem from Virgil's Aeneid, Book 3. The place where the sort of dead, futureless, but still living people from fallen Troy have retreated to, which Aeneas sees for just a moment, where you first find Andromache, the mother of now dead Astyanax and former wife of Hector, now married to his traitorous brother Helenus, crying next to a dried up stream, in the same way that Nausicaa was laughing with her maids, showing her wasted life as opposed to the life of promise ahead of Nausicaa. And so this place also strikes me as a place that is gone already, that has lost its spirit or soul, and that Yuffie is in some way trying to rejuvenate it. Is that a theme we're seeing across with several of these characters, that are trying to rejuvenate dying, or I don't know, or to revivify dead ideas? I'm not sure. I'm at sort of the limit of my thinking on that question.
I think it's a really interesting one because the settings that Barrett is associated with, Antifa, Midgar, and Corel, are both very dark and depressed in some ways. But I think that they have a similar thing going on, where there's always like children playing there still too. That seems pretty strongly connected with Cosmo Canyon in Red 13's case. Like, he is actually apparently quite young for his people. So there's this theme, like, even in all these places where dark things have happened in the past or are happening, and even under the shadow of Shinra and of Sephiroth and all of that stuff, there still are these hopeful and playful images that are pretty insistent. I think that's conveyed here pretty well with the water imagery, which recalls both Costa del Sol, another vacation spot, yes, but also Junon Harbor, where you saved that girl's life, Priscilla, right? And met the dolphin, which is like another image of play, right? So there's something going on there with, like, the water, which makes you think about the life stream perhaps, but also just like other literal water images in the game so far, and the youth, that the juvenation part of the word rejuvenation just means like youthfulness, right? So that does seem, and of course the game is marketed to young people primarily. It seems to be pitched on a level that they're gonna get into, and so I think that it's definitely got an aspect of sort of channeling those things and cultivating those things, and showing how they can best not necessarily like arise in the first place, because that's sort of a mystery, I guess, in many ways, like but how they can best come to fruition, at least. It's something that Eris is another really interesting image of, right? She's like in a garden, and she is a flower salesperson, right? And that's like the first thing you see of her. But she disappears, and so that's one of the one of the most unsettling parts of the game, but you are prepared for it in lots of little ways with other betrayals and other losses.
Well, it is interesting to what extent the game offers itself as sort of a whetstone for your own self-development, and that it is going to require that you develop your character in order to progress within it, and the characters within the game are going to take more and more responsibility for themselves and for the world, right? In fact, it will not be possible for Cloud to save the world until he faces himself, which will be his ultimate task. At least we'll talk about what the final fight means, but it will be something like that. But I mean, just sort of along those lines, I wanted to talk a little bit about having to play without materia and what you thought about that, and sort of the humility that goes into that, and sort of the awareness of that which you are missing, and how that sort of is a model of the sort of experience of being in Wutai and of trying to get it back, right? And so because it was sort of tough, and it required a different style of play, and I had to reorient my values and different tools, like you were saying earlier, became more valuable all of a sudden, tools I would have never otherwise used. And that's sort of maybe part of the value of a side quest, that it sort of disorganizes your usual way of doing things, sort of like a vacation, so that you can, by putting together like a new routine or getting through a new task or challenge, sort of sharpen up your ability to get through tasks or challenges so that you come back to your bigger ones sharper, more ready, with more experience. Yeah.
Yeah, it definitely also highlights certain things that you otherwise wouldn't use as much, like items, as you go along you acquire a bunch of items. I don't know, I never really use them. I usually just use materia instead, but suddenly they become super important. If you want, you can start using some of those like weird items that you pick up after fights, sometimes that like cast spells for you. I sort of, it takes too long to scroll through and find them, so I didn't bother using them, but they're there.
Yeah, I thought they were going to be a much bigger help than they were. Yeah. I didn't use them really except for once.
Yeah, and I know our friend Vince had some kind of theory about grenades being really useful, but I haven't tried that one still. But anyway, like, it also brings, at least for me, the limit breaks to the forefront, because with materia you can sort of customize your characters to a great extent, but the thing that still remains different are, of course, their stats, which have to do with leveling up, so you can sort of balance those out too, but their limit breaks, like the ones that you use more, you're going to develop their limits faster, get them to higher levels, and they can do a ton of damage when your strength is high, like it is when you have no materia to lower your physical strength, and when you have these really strong weapons equipped that have no materia slots anyway. So like, I could do like way more damage with Cloud's limit break than I normally can, and it was crucial, it turned out to be, because I would also take a lot more damage because I wouldn't be able to heal as quickly and efficiently, and I wouldn't be able to end fights as quickly, so like this was it really like makes you notice things that otherwise had sort of gone by unremarked.
Well, it's humbling too, because there were multiple times when I thought about, well, I'm going to do this, but oh no, that's because of materia. Like, I thought, okay, well, I'm going to get an extra hit on the boss because of my counters. Oh no, I don't have counter materia right now. And I remember thinking, let's see. What was the other thing that I was thinking? I'm sorry that I'm losing it. That it wasn't about curing myself. Oh, well, that was an annoying thing too, right? I couldn't just do cure all when I was in my status screen like I usually could, rather than using perishable items. so many of my actions were already predicated on the presence of materia and using of like enemy skill and curing myself and attacking all the opponents and casting shields or barriers on myself, or having a summon to shoot at the enemy that it's like I didn't even know the characters as they were afterwards. I had a totally different style of game. And so it totally shook me up. And I thought that was so interesting because it's almost like suggesting what like a good athletic regimen is, where you sort of focus on important small parts and segments or in units, sort of like with teaching, right? You teach the whole through teaching the parts in succession. And so this side quest is itself sort of a part that focuses on, well, what would you do if you didn't have, your sophisticated strategies laid out with materia? And that's actually going to knock you back several different strategy points. And how are you going to deal with that? And maybe that will help us later on if we find ourselves in situations where we can't be as reliant on materia as we would like to, or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, well, it also just gives you a sense of the richness of like an appreciation of the things that you normally take for granted. I guess that's like another way of saying humility, maybe, which is kind of interesting to think about. But it also, I don't know about you, but I noticed that I kept my fire materia. Did you keep yours? Or is that like some glitch that happened?
I don't know. I didn't look, but I just didn't even have a materia slot in the battles. It was just back an item.
Yeah, so, yeah. Well, that's something I need to check up on then, if that was like a weird glitch or something. But yeah, so for whatever reason, my fire materia was still there, but it's like sort of useless on its own, because your physical attacks are way stronger when you have no other materia equipped. So it's sort of like moot, actually, which is interesting to think about too. Like the cumulative effect of having a bunch of materia equipped is pretty pronounced, actually. And things like counter attack and the other ones like HP plus, MP plus, you become like very dependent on those. I agree. Enemy skill is a huge one. It's kind of awesome if you go out of your way to find some of those enemy skills. They're really useful, at least early in the game here. Anyway, but the way that the hunt plays out, you have to also like team up with the Turks. And I thought that was kind of like an interesting nod to your vulnerability in this moment, that you have to join forces with this like sort of mortal enemy Team Rocket type group you have to make common cause with here. And I don't know how to exactly tie that in. I feel like there's something there going to the whole question about Wutai itself, that it's sort of fallen on hard times and has to like, I don't know, do things that it normally wouldn't want to do, but which ultimately, if we're sort of following the analogy out, would ultimately make Wutai stronger if it does eventually rise back to its former glory. It will be better for it, which is tough. I don't know quite how far to go with that.
Well, if your articulation,
like the Turks,
if they're prostituting themselves, the fact that Don Corneo shows up out of nowhere and tries to take two women. I agree with your point nicely.
Sorry, last thing you were saying.
I was saying that the fact that Don Corneo shows up again from the slums, who is a known pimp. The fact that he shows up and tries to make a prostitute of Elena and Yuffie, while having them crucified on the eyes of sort of a Buddhist-looking figure, agrees with your point quite a bit, I would say. That Wutai might be itself sort of Mary Magdalening sort of itself out in order to become stronger in the future. that this is a sort of time of slavery or servitude, and it's just a time of being asleep, not a time of being dead. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think that ties in really nicely, and it also goes to the that iconography there of the cross and the Buddhist or whatever it is statue. That seems to be the kind of combination that we've been seeing throughout this game between motifs from Western and Eastern mythology being kind of brought together. And in a negative light, yeah, there's a kind of cheapening maybe of them because they're sort of deracinated and they're mingled with things which, strictly speaking, might not really fit together that well. But on the other hand, you could look at it, not that they're prostituting themselves or something, right? But that they're like your party and the Turks, that they are making the best of a bad situation, right? And that like an outcome arises which otherwise would have been impossible, where you were not going to prevent Don Corneo from his nefarious plans, right? But thankfully, Rude does whatever he does. He's either got some kind of projectile that like knocks Don Corneo down, and then Reno comes over and stomps him. Just stomps him out. It's cold, but it's effective. It's like it takes Cloud aback a little bit, right? And the rest of the party, they're like, oh, the Turks are actually like kind of a force to be reckoned with here.
Yeah, I mean, there's several things there. Like the fact that you're seeing the Turks again at Repose, and I now think that maybe you see them at Repose here and in Junon because, I don't know, you can be engaging at a side quest here, so it's like you're on vacation from the main quest, and so are they. And also, it's very odd that they can just sort of be so blasé about seeing you right after Singh has just died. And it seems as if Elena is blaming you, which again suggests or brings me back, if that's actually true, to the theory that maybe the Sephiroth who was acting in this semi-physical, semi-intangible way in the temple was not Sephiroth, but was you, right? And the fact that he's got the black materia now. I don't know how far I can go with this sort of allegory here, but it's amazing that any of the Turks can suffer your presence if they think that you killed Singh at this point or had anything to do with it. And I also just wanted to know what you thought about the fact that you see them again in Repose, but then again you see them work, and so there's again a parallel between them and you. They're similar in age. They kidnap, whereas you try and liberate, but you're all sort of young fighters who are trying to catch Sephiroth. And you used to work for Shinra and have been affected by them. They do work for Shinra. And what is the significance of continuing to run into them? Is it sort of the ad hoc solution between you two is supposed to represent sort of the ad hoc solution between like the meeting of the Eastern and Western mythologies and like what has to be born from that? And just to add to that, it's interesting that there would be sort of prostitution imagery here because at the top of the Purgatorio, that is, of course, what Dante claims has happened to the church, and that it has been corrupted from a pristine chariot led by a griffin that is Jesus, the dual-natured creature, both human and divine, has been turned into sort of a brothel led by a king or a giant, which are French kings from the 14th century, and that beats a harlot on a wagon over and over and has had a piece torn out by a dragon, which is the Muslims to Dante. And so, again, whenever there's a major sort of cultural change, this sort of, I think, prostitution imagery rears its head when there's sort of a mixing, I don't know, sort of a mixing between two traditions which would not otherwise, which needs a bridge between them in order for, I don't know. It needs the proper retort in which to mix into something new. Again, it's hard for me to even find the words to address these sorts of concepts, because it seems like the comment is that, just like with nature, that which is present needs to be used in order to produce the fecund future. And that Yuffie represents that sort of hope and in the future, and that to some extent your fusing with the Turks represents sort of the fusing of Wutai with the sort of Western-esque Shinra, which is maybe the sort of theme, one of the major themes of this video game, which is the sort of fusing together of the mythologies and thus sort of cultures or goals of the East and West.
Yeah, I think one way to look at it might be to say, like, the universal thing that's brought out here is loyalty.
Yes.
Right? Even in the face of various kinds of betrayal, or like the way that Reno and Rude look down on Elena in a lot of ways, like you both groups want to rescue their friends from Don Corneo, right? Because they can both agree that what he's about to do is way out of bounds, and so he's like this I don't know, scapegoat almost of the things that are negative in any culture, and the force that's brought out to contend with him is a version of, like, I don't know, an image of that which is most desirable, most admirable, right, and honorable in any culture. And so it's like this kind of glue that by their aspirations brings two otherwise inimical groups together here. And the defeat of Corneo is pretty cool too, because he again doesn't fight you like directly. He has this monster he calls his pet, and so you deal with that. That's what your party does. Whereas, again, the Turks directly fight Don Corneo after the fact, right? They sort of pick up the slack because your party is probably pretty beat up after that battle, and he seems to have the upper hand. He's got some kind of device, but they neutralize him, right? And so it seems to be the case that there's certain things which are going to be both despicable on the one hand and admirable on the other, which really one way to see this too is like at the end of that, when Shinra headquarters is getting in touch and they're like, okay, so time to go catch Cloud again, they say, okay, we'll get right on that, right? They have, again, allegiance to a higher authority in this case than the person who's paying their paycheck or whatever. So there's something that they and you can both agree is like noble, and something that is not.
That's right. And even though they try not to acknowledge it and try to keep things in the same way and say, we're just agreeing not to get in your way if you don't do that with us. You're right. When headquarters gives them the order, again, just as so they reduplicate the theme, right? In the very beginning, they said, we're on break. And when Shinra even showed up, they said, we're still on break, though they do eventually help. And so they're showing that, yes, they have allegiance to, like you said, a higher order loyalty, and that they see this loyalty being played out or mirrored in Cloud's team, and they realize that they share something very deep, it seems. And it's very interesting because I've never felt particularly threatened by the Turks, and now I feel as if, sort of like we talked about in Potter's Pockets, the relationship between Harry and Pettigrew, that Pettigrew sort of owes him one, and there's something deep underlying that it's sort of the same now between both these groups. They both were fighting to get back one of their members who is not in high status with them right now, right? Elena is one of the newest members and talks way too much, doesn't know where she fits within the group yet. And Yuffie has just stolen all your materia. And so her status as friend is highly questionable right now, though you've sort of learned how to be betrayed at this point. Kate Sith has helped with that. And so, yes, like you're saying, it's like you develop a friendship based on recognition of this shared deep value. And that's what perhaps the basis of a strong relationship is. And B, it is interesting that it happens here during a side quest. And C, precisely because of something bad that happened to you, now something really good has come out of it, right? You lost all your materia, but now you have a strong relationship with like the strong arm force of the enemy, and that they're pursuing the same thing you're pursuing, which is very dangerous, and maybe that could be very helpful to you in the future. So even though you went out of your way to do this, it's actually going to be to your advantage to have been so sort of charitable, I guess.
Yeah, and there's certain concrete benefits to doing this too, right? Where you get a few new materia and like a weapon for Yuffie or whatever, but it does seem mostly to be about like getting to explore some other storylines and characters and things like that. The imagery that takes place up there, where the two young women are held against the statue, they're placed over its eyes, right? Almost like the X's that you draw over the eyes of a picture to represent that it's dead, right? They're explicitly having their arms out like that, referring to the crucifixion. They, as you say, they refer to the harlots or the prostitutes, which is another dominant image that you find in biblical stuff. And then the statue that they're up against is a kind of Buddha looking thing, and or some kind of Hindu deity. Its hands are doing maybe more of a Hinduish thing, but its face looks sort of more Buddhist. I'm not sure quite what they're going for there with that mixture, but anyway, it's a riot of iconography from these different religious traditions. That seems to be part of Don Corneo's plot or something. It's like to show you that it's like him being, as he is, very evil, right? To be like very sacrilegious there, I guess. But it's a lot like what we saw, that weird scene going on in his then the Honeybee Inn in the lounge, back in his home base in Midgar way before it, where there's like weird religious talk going on in a dark room, and there's something about the Promised Land mentioned, but you don't really know anything about it yet at that point. And so to me, one way to take that is like the game reflecting on the way that it is also mixing all of this mythological and religious stuff, and kind of throwing it all together and seeing what happens with it. It seems like it's sort of acknowledging that, well, there is something a little bit icky about that, like there's something. And one way that this is talked about too is like they are using their talents and their arts, the game makers that is, to produce something that's like a commodity, like they're trying to sell a lot of games, and that's like the main thing that they're Shinra overlords, right? Their corporate people paying their paychecks are interested in, not necessarily the quality or thematic a message or something like that. So I think there's a lot of interesting stuff there. It's really difficult for me to try to tease it out at this point, but I don't know. Did you have any other thoughts or things you were noticing about that particular?
Yeah, just a couple things. So you get the cross turned upside down at the end, sort of like the anti symbol. So it goes explicitly to anti, sort of Christ symbol imagery there. what Corneo's seems to be doing there is, I'm sorry, it dropped right out of my head, Wes. It's as if Yuffie came and stole my materia right at that particular moment. I can't believe it. It's very interesting that Yuffie,
well, she does pop in and take right when you find I think it's the MP plus is the one you find first, maybe.
Yes.
She like pops in and just like steals it immediately. That was one of the things that kind of made me laugh out loud this time as I was playing.
Yeah. I mean, I agree that there's the Eastern and Western tradition being mixed right there, and that Elena and I was going to say that it seems as if what the game is saying is that sometimes the right thing can happen. It's as if it's the opposite from what happened in The Dark Knight when the two loved people had to be chosen between, and actually like the evil villain won in that situation. Well, in this case, the evil villain tries to like make a choice between the two, and it's going to be the choice you wish for least because you like Yuffie more because she's part of your party, and you end up saving both of them, and actually he ends up dying, which also strikes me that if it's teaching us a lesson about narrative, that if it's going to be a good narrative that represents life, that you're going to have the right thing happen, even if to some extent it seems bad because somebody just died here, but it might have been an appropriate execution given what he was threatening to do, or at least that seems to be how we feel in this case. But that if sometimes the right thing happens, well, definitely it's going to be juxtaposed with the wrong things, like when you tried to save, that entire sector of a city and you failed to, or like what's coming up at the end of this first disc too, where evil wins again. And even though you're fighting alongside the, a symbol of evil here, and you get a win, it is again a temporary win.
Yeah, and again, I think it's interesting that they are the ones who deliver that final blow. Like, as reprehensible as he is, it'd be pretty shocking to see Corneo thrown off the cliffside by one of your party members.
Yeah.
That would be a little too much like, Dyne, like the scene with Dyne. Like, that's another one that is kind of recalled here, like him falling off the cliff, spread out like a cross, So this is like not the first time this sort of thing has happened, but it would be really unsettling to see one of your party members basically kill Corneo in cold blood there. So it's one of the tricks. They sort of do that instead of you having to do it. There's also, back in the caves there's these fires that you can't pass through yet. So it's like there's this suggestion, I guess, that there's certain things that your party is still not yet ready to do here. There's certain aspects, there's certain mysteries of this place which you're not yet prepared to explore. And the kind of choice that they make here is one that you are not forced to make yet. That's for another time. I don't even remember what's behind those fires. It might be significant, it might not, I can't remember now, but
according to Jagged, you get a pretty nice weapon for Yuffie.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, she is a party member who has like definite advantages. Her weapons are long range, and she seems like pretty well balanced in some ways. She's one I haven't used yet much in this game, and so I need to like level her up a bit before I come back and do the rest of this side quest, dealing with her fighting her way up that pagoda and whatever else is going on here in Wutai. But I'm glad that we both scraped through this weird and fun materialless adventure. I had a lot of trouble with that boss. Like, I almost got killed fighting it because it took out a couple of my party members with Arrow 3, which is a spell that you have not like seen it to this point in the game, but does a ton of damage. So I kind of got lucky. It cast it on my remaining member, which happened to be Cloud, and it missed. And Cloud's next attack killed it. So it was just that close to squeak by here, for me anyway.
Wow, and that's very, very, very interesting. It makes me it's interesting that Corneo has a reptile or snake sort of creature that comes at you from the depths, and then now here on a mountain in the heights comes at you with sort of a winged creature that can cast arrow, which is like a tornado or air attack against you. And so he sort of comes from the depths and the heights, or you find him everywhere or something like that. Well, yeah, so this is an interesting bit about Wutai. And so for next time, where is it that we should get to? And I suppose we should announce that we're going to have at least one special guest in the next couple weeks. So keep your ears open for them, listeners. We're going to have Dr. Matt Roos from the Concilians Conversations on here to talk a little bit about addiction and video games and fantasy with us. And well, back to you, Wes, to the original question.
Yes, I think we should try to go to the Forbidden City. I don't know how long the Forbidden City itself is, but I suspect that we won't likely get through all of it. So, finding your way to the Sleeping Forest and starting to make your way towards the end of Disc 1. Yeah, I don't know exactly where the stopping point would be, but somewhere in there, I think we'll probably have enough to talk about. Yeah.
And perhaps at that time I can start talking a little bit about how my perspective playing this has gone more from a childish, just sitting down and trying to get through it as fast as possible and trying to get immediate satisfaction from it, from more of I've been doing this for a while, more of a middle-aged perspective. I've been doing this for a while. I intend to do this for a lot longer. It's like 20 hours of gameplay now, but there are like 30 more to go. And that now I'm taking the time to smooth out the rough edges, and that's sort of representative of where we are at our task with the podcast too, where now it's like we're not in our very first moments, but we have a lot of road behind us, but we recognize there's a ton of road in front of us, and that actually changes how we play, and that we play more consistently and better because of that. And we sort of invest more in the future, and that is sort of the ideal sort of equilibrated or like excellent perspective or way of being that middle age can give to one, as opposed to, say, young age and then sort of old age once you're past being able to sort of, embody a strategy to model a better future.
Yeah, I think there's a lot this game can instill or sort of bring out. And I like that idea of it being a kind of analogy for the podcasting and education platform stuff that we're working on. It's cool that Dr. Roos is able to make an appearance on this one. I really enjoyed your recent conversation with him and with Daniel Babcock. If he's listening, I say hi to him, because that guy, I haven't talked to him in a while, but I really appreciated his insights and his questions on the discussion of free will that you guys had. It was really interesting.
Well, I hope he is listening. I'll definitely pass that along. And it's wonderful to hear that you're listening. I'm still enjoying very much your Game Cool books. It's making me want to read The Golden Compass and go through that with you at some point. And, something that the listeners can request. So a personal thing I would love to do with Wes at some point is kind of just like we're going through Whitman sort of line by line, do that with the Divine Comedy with Wes. That's sort of like, that could be like some super magnum opus stuff. And if the listeners ever wanted to do sort of a preceptorial, we could put together 8 to 10 of us and do sort of our own sort of foray through a book. That's something we're starting to put together, an idea for that. And if anybody'd ever be interested in talking to us live about the sorts of things that we talk about, that is, I think, something that we are producing a model for right now. So, keep your ears open.
Yeah, books, video games, it would be so cool to teach courses in this kind of format. but with live discussion and question and answer and stuff on the kinds of things that we like to read and talk about. I would look forward to that. So yeah, we'll keep on working towards that, I suppose.
Yeah.
Thanks again.
Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Wesley Schantz. Until next time.
All right. Yep, enjoy your Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving. Safe travels.